Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons. We are on number 42, parshat MATOT in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. And this section today, in this portion of MATOT, includes three interesting subjects. And we're soon going to talk about what's the combination and what we could learn out from these three subjects. Subject number one is about vows. One of the things that the Torah tells us, that if an individual, man or woman, she or he, makes a vow, so they need to keep to what they have said. And if they don't keep to what they have said, it's considered a transgression. So it brings out the importance of speech. How important, how careful we have to be in what we are saying. But more than that, there's a lot of times the language of a vow. I forbid on myself to do this and this. So the minute a person says in that kind of a language that he had forbid himself, so then he has to keep to it. And the only way out of it is he needs to go to an expert, a sage, that will disavow the vow and show him or her that have you known that this is something that you cannot keep? It's a good chance that you would have never made this vow. And if that's the case, it's called the nullifications of vows. But what's interesting is, it's a whole section here that is chapter 30 in this section of Matot. That's the name of the parsha. That the first section, this is what it talks about. The procedure of vows and the procedure of nullifying the vows. So that's a very important subject by itself. The other subject that it talks about is the war against the Midianite. The Midianite were at that time the enemy, and there was a war of revenge against them. And so there's a whole section that talks about it, about what went on. If in the previous sections, what we know about Bilam, the one that was hired to curse the Jewish people, he had come from Midian. And the people of Midian, they were to destroy the Jewish people. So this was kind of a war here against them, and there's a whole discussion about it. And what's very important there, that a lot of the spoils that were brought back from the war went to the temple, went, as it describes here, to God. So this is how it's divided. Half they kept, but the other half was gone to the services, for the service of the temple. And we find the whole idea there, how to kosherize things, how there were objects that belonged to something that's not kosher, and then through putting into water or other kinds of things, that is the laws of koshering, then it becomes kosher, that it could be used. So that is the second part, discussion of this portion. And finally, towards the end, there's a whole other discussion that as they are about to go into Israel, two tribes, the tribe of Reuven and the tribe of Gad, had approached Moshe, and they said, we would like to stay here. We don't want to cross the Jordan. We have a lot of cattle and big families, and there's a lot of land here to pasture, so we would like to stay on the other side of the Jordan River and not cross to Israel. Well, in the beginning, Moses was very upset, and he compared them to the spies. He says, this is the story of the spies, that they didn't want to go into Israel, gave a bad report, and you are repeating the same mistake. And they said, no, we take on ourselves, we will go to conquer the land of Israel when we need to go, and we will be in the front line. After we succeed and Israel is in the hands of all the tribes, we are asking, could we then move and be on the other side? Where by that Moshe has agreed because they have shown that they're ready to fight with everyone to conquer the land. And with that is the discussions of this portion that is called MATOT. What is the word MATOT? MATOT is the branches. But what is it speaking about? It says, Vaidaber Moshe, Moshe spoke, El Rashei HaMatot, to the tribal heads. To the tribal heads. Now, when we talk about, many times we talk about in general, about Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, and when we talk about the tribes of Israel, in English, you'll hear many times that expression, is part of the tribe. In Hebrew, tribe has two words in Hebrew for it. Or shevet, so we call Shiftei Israel, or we call Matot Israel, Matot Bnei Israel, Mate Bnei Israel. Both are speaking about a branch or a tree. So it's like will be, there is a tree, and the tree has branches. So there's, always we say the 12 tribes. So there are 12 branches. But sometimes they're called Mate, and sometimes they're called Shevet. What is the difference? So in Hebrew, Mate means after you broke off the branch or the piece of the tree, and it became a rod, and it became hard, strong. What does it mean? It's strong by itself, but it's not connected anymore to its source. However, a branch, because it's connected to its source, that's why it is soft. It is moist, and that's why it's soft. When it is a rod or a stick, it's detached from its source, and then the moist is gone, and it's a solid thing by itself. So each of these things have an advantage and have a disadvantage. The disadvantage of the rod or stick, that it is detached. It's detached from its source, but then has an advantage that it is strong. It's very hard to break it. When we go now to the branch, that is still connected, so the advantage obviously is that it is attached, it's connected to its source, but then what some will say maybe a little bit of a disadvantage, it is soft, it is not hard. So therefore, as we know, we could come and easy break it off or something like this. What does it mean in the service of us towards God? What is the example from this idea? So it says like this, because normally each one of us, we have a soul that exists inside us, and that soul is a representative of God. As we would say, it's a branch, or it could be a rod. So normally speaking, we would like it should be attached, and when it's attached, it has its softness. When it's detached, so it becomes strong, but the idea becomes strong is, what it means is that even when we find in ourselves in this world, when there is complications and challenges, and sometimes the connection is not seen, what looks like maybe a detachment, however, that gives the strength to the individual to become strong. Because many times the way we become strong is because of our challenges. So it's true, being attached is very important, but being attached also means not being tested or didn't mature yet. And a lot of times, it's wonderful. In the world that we live, no question, many times what we would want for the person is to be attached all the time. But being attached all the time is also not being tested. So in the language of Kabbalah, when you're all the time connected to spirituality, how could you go wrong? It's very hard to go wrong. But at the same time then we don't know how would that individual be when things are not clear, when spirituality is not revealed. The idea is you want to have both things. You want to have the spirituality, but you also want to have all the strength and all the power that when you find yourself in a situation that you need to have strength and overcome challenges, you'll be able to. We find ourselves, we live in this world, we see many things. We see, and I've seen where people are being trained how to survive in the wilderness. And there's many people that, in other words, that an individual should be ready that if he ends up to be lost in the forest, for example, that shouldn't lose themselves. They should be able to cut some wood, make a fire, how do you find water, and all these things. You learn to find out, and then how to survive in these kinds of challenges. And then if, God forbid, this happens, you're equipped to survive till they'll find you. When you don't know what to do, God forbid, you start panicking right away and you feel helpless and you don't know what to do. And God forbid, the worst could happen. So if we take that, the same thing in the relationship with God. God has created us in such a way that from one point we're attached. One point, we are all created in His image. We're all here because of God. But from the other point, there's a certain concealment. God is hidden. It's not apparent, to the fact, as I said many times, that there's even people in this world that could deny that exists a creator. So in other words, God created conditions in the world that the person, because he thinks he's his own entity, he's his own being, could even deny that there is a creator. So created a situation that what it looks from the outside like there's a concealment. The advantage of that is that allows the individual that believes and the individual that understands that there is a God and there's a relationship with God, that despite all these challenges, they stand strong like a rod and like a stick. And that is the reason for those two names. There's times when our relationship with God is soft, moist, it's obvious, it's clear, the branch is soft, and then there's sometimes it looks detached. But from the other point, we become very strong because we have to overcome the challenges and be strong. So that's the introduction. When we go into these three stories that I mentioned before of our portion, how they introduce the heads of the tribes with the word mateh, as sticks, as rods, to tell us that we're talking about a situation where God expects us to be strong and to overcome challenges. Now, the beauty of overcome challenges is not only, as mentioned many times, is to subdue the opposition, to overcome the opposition, but to transform the opposition. So in other words, where the enemy, not only that the enemy lays low, that the enemy has become a friend. That's sometimes the hardest thing to achieve, because what happens a lot of times, as we see United States, or maybe other countries, they have a very strong army. Because they have a strong army, so other nations don't want to start up with them. The idea is that not only they shouldn't want to start up, but they are friends. You have transformed the situation. Where in the world that we live, it's not so easy. It's not so simple. However, what does it mean in our service to God? is that idea too, that a person needs to be so strong. A person finds himself in a place where godly ideas are so foreign, and the person talks about it, and he's successful not only in being strong, but in convincing the people around him that that's the right thing to do. So what happens then? You are becoming an influence on the environment around you. And then you're elevating the environment around you to be able to serve God properly. And that's really what the purpose is, what we're doing here in this world. It says that each one of us has their portion in this world. And if you take this world and you divide to everyone's portion, to everyone's section, and each one concentrates on their backyard, on their portion, and they do what they need to do, that unites with the next door neighbor that is trying to do the right thing. And slowly but surely, everyone is merging together to make this world a habitat place, a place that you could live for the sake of God. That's the ultimate goal, and that's what the idea is. But right now we're talking about, in the first section, where the person is making a vow. And we find something very interesting. There's a little bit of a contradiction. In one place in the Talmud, it's written that a person should avoid to make vows. A person should avoid to make vows because why? Stay away from things that God has given to you. So it's a one direction. So in one place it says, in other words, it's not a good idea to make vows. One place in the Talmud says. Because what are vows? Vows are on things that you're already allowed to have, and you are afraid that you're going to be indulging in these things, so you're creating a vow. It's like almost, why are you staying away from things that God had permitted? It's like taking an extra thing on you. That's what's written in one place. But in another place, it's written just the opposite, that it's important to make vows. It's like a fence around the Torah. It's a fence. In other words, I see I'm not strong, and I can't be careful in so many things. So I think of myself, you know what? I'm going to stay away from this and this thing because this thing is the one that creates for me problems. So how do we look on these two places, what it says in the Talmud? So it's explained very interesting. It all depends, where are we in our service to God? If an individual that is very strong, then don't make so much vows. You don't need to make a vow. You're strong enough, and you don't have to be afraid. Let me give you an example that will help us a little bit to understand. When a person is dealing with certain problems in his health, and he goes to a doctor, and the doctor says to the individual, all what you have is curable. As we all know, two important things. You need to diet, and you need to exercise. If you diet and exercise, everything is going to work out. For some of us, to hear that, that's enough. So automatically, every day, I diet and I exercise because I got it, I understood it, it registered, and finished. It's being done. But for some of us, that's not enough because the temptation of eating is so strong, and the temptation of sometimes after a hard day of work and all of a sudden to start exercising is a little bit hard also sometimes. So needs sometimes a push. I have to maybe become a member of an exercise club. I need to do things, maybe they'll cost me extra, but I'll have a challenge to be able to do it. I need to go to a Weight Watchers. I need to do things where in the first case, I don't need to do all these things because I'm so disciplined that I don't need all that. Same thing is when we're talking about vows, because a person wants to be pure in his relationship with God. So if the person is strong enough, you don't need to do vows. Most of the vows have to do with indulging and things like this. You don't need to do because you're strong enough. You don't have to make a vow. However, when an individual is not strong, I could almost say that talks for a lot of us, and needs extra strength, then you need to add on a vow. But what is this telling us? That's step one. The ultimate step or the ultimate goal is when you don't need a vow. See, in other words, when a person that lives here in this world and constantly needs to create vows and things like this, but in back of their mind, they know that's not the goal. That's only, meanwhile, to help me to get strong. But the minute I get strong, I don't need to have all these things. So what does it mean? I am looking on transformation. I am looking forward every day to a day that I won't need all this. The same as the example I brought before. When a person diets right and exercises, all of a sudden, if it's done right, they'll realize I could cut on my medicines. It's a whole different story. I'm almost going to say it's a whole different life when you are doing everything the way it's supposed to be done. So the same thing in our relationship with God, it is the same idea. Sometimes I need those extra things, what people say, oh, this guy's extra religious. But maybe that individual needs that extra because this is what helps them to be straight. If not, they lose it. And for some, I don't need all these extra things. I'm strong enough and I could do what I have to do. But what does that tell me? That the goal is not vows. The goal is not to have any vows, to have transformation. So that's why, that's the idea. That's the idea of the stick and the rod, that even if I am detached and God is not so revealed, but I'm strong. I'm strong and I could change things to the good, till the point is, even though physically speaking, we can't say such a thing that after something is broken off, she should get attached. But spiritually, of course, we could say that even when a person was detached, but after a while, they could become attached again. Because technically speaking, we were never departed from God. It was just a temporary concealment. And God is wonderful and good and always waiting for us that we should come back. And that's what's important. The same thing is when we come to this war with Midian. The war with Midian is the way we see it. It's very simple. A lot of times we think that we could go on life and not to have to fight for our ideals. But we know in the world that we live, and all the time, there's no such a thing. A person has to stand strong in what they believe. And sometimes, as some will say, unfortunately, you need to fight for what you believe. So a person cannot just go and say, okay, I believe what I believe. The other person, let them do what they want. Not always it works that way. If we want to have influence, if we want other people to believe what we are, we need to have a voice. We need to be strong in what we believe. And that goes to the point of view that sometimes there needs to be what we would call physical contact. There has to be what it would be called in a physical level a war, but spiritually speaking, also the same idea, where you're fighting for what you believe. Now, what we see over here is something interesting. When they were able to be successful with the so-called enemy den of Midian, they found a lot of vessels by Midian that they were not kosher, and because they took from them and they were able to kosherize it with the whole process the way you're supposed to do it, then all of a sudden you were able to elevate it that it should become holy. What we learn from it is something very interesting, that it's possible that something that was not holy, even opposed, and then you were able to bring it in. So that's the idea of this second section. Until we come to the third point with the children of Gad and Reuven, where they wanted to stay across the Jordan. So the story of the spies, as we saw earlier, was that they wanted to stay in the desert. They were afraid to go into Israel. In Israel means you have to earn a living. We explained many sections ago that when the Jews were in the desert, food came from heaven, everything was provided for them, they didn't have to worry. Compare that to a child growing up in a parent's home before it's time to go on your own. Everything is wonderful. You're being fed, clothes is being bought for the child. It's taken care of. Only thing what we want, learn, advance in your study, do what you have to do. And then comes a certain point, time to be on your own because of the good foundation that the individual, she or him, got at home. Now they're able to continue and to go on. The story with the spies is they want to stay in the desert. They didn't want to mature. They wanted to stay that way. And a lot of us have that feeling all the time. And there's some of us also that don't want to leave home. Everything is wonderful. The children of Gad and Reuven seemed like in the beginning that maybe they're also talking that way. They want to stay across the Jordan because also over there is more comfortable and there's a place to pasture for all the cattle that they have. But when it became clear that they said that even when there is a war, they will go out there. When there's the war, they will go out, they'll be in the front. They will fight for everyone. So that brings out the point that they are ready to go out of themselves. Now, let me explain this. A lot of times, the danger of all that is when we become secluded. In the life that we're talking about, now we're talking about living with challenges and overcoming challenges. Many times, when they see how dangerous it's out there in the world, the first approach that could be sometimes is, you know what? I'm secluding myself. I don't care about what goes on out there in the world. I'm afraid to go out there because I'm afraid instead of me influencing, I am going to become influenced. And that's what I'm afraid of. So the bottom line is, the idea of all that is we need to be strong like a rod. And the strong of a rod is that we should be able to influence others, and that is the third section. And that brings out the point of this whole entire lesson over here is that despite all the challenges, we overcome the challenge, we transform the challenges, and then we all will merit to see God revealed here in this world in front of everyone. Thank you. Okay.